Food in Britain after the Second World War was about survival, thrift, and making the most of whatever was on hand. Rationing shaped nearly every meal, and cooks had to stretch ingredients in ways that would keep families fed without wasting a crumb. Creativity became second nature, and breakfast was no exception. From porridge to tinned fish to dripping on bread, the morning table reflected a mix of tradition, scarcity, and ingenuity. Even in those difficult years, people still managed to find comfort in the little things, especially in breakfast time. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at 15 cheap breakfasts that carried Britain through the post-war era. A single slice of toast, smeared with butter and topped with jam or marmalade, captures post-war Britain's balance between necessity and a touch of sweetness. In the aftermath of World War II, food rationing persisted, and both sugar and dairy were highly regulated. Yet even with those limits, households managed to transform plain bread into something comforting and morale-boosting through homemade jam, often from garden or allotment fruit. And the thin layer of butter, when available, lent richness without excessive cost. Jam and butter on toast was not just cheap, it was deeply symbolic. It represented the reclaiming of small pleasures after years of hardship. For children, it was a morning treat. For adults, a reminder of pre-war normality. Because bread was rationed and often plain, adding jam gave flavour and variety. Butter, though limited, was distributed in small quotas, so the sparing use made every slice of toast more valuable. The simplicity meant it could be made in minutes, required minimal ingredients and fuel, and was accessible even in rural areas where supply lines dragged. Not every breakfast in post-war Britain was about sweetness or starch. Sometimes it was about making the most of what was left, and that's where devilled kidneys came in. Kidneys and other offal cuts were rarely the first choice at the butcher, but in a period when meat was still tightly rationed, they were both affordable and available. Families who could get their hands on kidneys would often spice them up with mustard, Worcestershire sauce, and a pinch of cayenne, transforming something humble into a fiery, flavourful breakfast dish. Served on toast, it was filling, protein-rich, and warming on cold mornings. The tradition of devilled kidneys stretches back to the Victorian gentlemen's clubs. But after the war, it found new life as a thrifty solution for households needing energy without spending ration coupons on prime cuts. It wasn't the most common breakfast, toast, porridge, and dripping held that title. But for those willing to cook with offal, it delivered real value and a sense of indulgence in lean times. There are mornings when nothing more than a bowl of warm, soft food soothes best, and for many in post-war Britain, milk on toast or simple milk puddings, warm milk soaked into bread or porridge, did exactly that. With many households still coping with limited fuel, scarce sugar, and tight dairy rations, such dishes offered comfort, nourishment, and a way to stretch what little was available. Milk puddings might be as basic as bread crusts or stale slices soaked in gently heated milk, maybe sweetened slightly if sugar rationing allowed. Alternatively, oats or other grains cooked down in milk, or a mixture of milk and water turned into a porridge-style pudding. These breakfasts showed the ingenuity born of austerity, using what was to avoid waste, getting calories through dairy, and making breakfast warm and easy to digest. Bright, crisp flakes in a bowl with cold milk were a novelty for many British households in the years following World War II. Breakfast cereals such as Cornflakes, originally imported or produced in limited quantities, and simpler porridge or oat-based instant or processed oats were treated as occasional alternatives to the more traditional warm breakfasts. Because rationing constrained sugar, fats, and imports, cereals were only sporadically available. But when they were, they offered speed, variety, and convenience. In the immediate post-war years, cereals filled several gaps. For children especially, cereal saved fuel, saved time, and avoided needing scarce spreads or fats. Processed oats or prepared oats were easier than full oatmeal and gradually became more common in households that could afford them. Cornflakes and similar flakes were more of a luxury in rationed periods, but even then, some homes had them a few times a week. When mornings demanded more than just toast, many British households craved the full English breakfast: eggs, bacon, sausage, beans, fried bread or toast, sometimes black pudding and tomatoes. But in post-war Britain, that plate of plenty often became much more modest. Rationing of bacon, eggs, sausage, and even fats meant that many people could only enjoy a partial English or skinny version of the fry-up on special days or weekends. Because meat and dairy were heavily rationed, bacon, butter, eggs, people could rarely muster the full complement of sausages, rashers, and eggs together. Beans in tomato sauce, mushrooms, or fresh tomatoes, often imported, were luxuries. Still, the idea of the full English persisted, culturally iconic, and served as a goal, something that signalled comfort and normality, even when boiled down to its simplest parts. For families stretching every scrap of food, frying yesterday's bread or leftover potatoes was an easy way to turn basics into something filling. Fried bread was usually cut from the national loaf, crisped in dripping or lard, and served alongside eggs or beans when available. Even stale slices worked well, soaking up flavour and adding crunch to the plate. Fried potatoes were another thrifty option. Boiled or roasted spuds from the night before could be sliced and refried, giving them new life as a hot, hearty breakfast. Both dishes relied on cheap staples and whatever cooking fat was on hand, making them perfect for households short on meat or dairy. Though humble, fried bread and potatoes became staples of the pared-down fry-up, offering warmth, calories and comfort at the start of the day. When fresh meat was expensive or in short supply, tins of corned beef became a kitchen staple in post-war Britain. A tin of bully beef, as corned beef was sometimes called, could be turned into something hearty by chopping and frying it with leftover potatoes and onions, making a hash that was warm, filling, and cheap. Because potatoes and onions were more readily obtainable and could stretch the meal, this dish made real sense for working families. Corned beef hash was especially popular for breakfasts in the 1940s and 1950s in working-class homes and school kitchens where supplies were limited. It didn't require fancy tools or expensive ingredients. The tin preserved the meat, and frying gave crunch and flavour without much butter or fat. Served with a fried egg when available, it added protein and made the meal more satisfying. Though it carried the stigma of austerity, this hash was beloved for its simplicity, affordability, and ability to fill bellies before long days of work or school. Many households in post-war Britain turned to tinned fish as a dependable way to add protein when fresh fish was erratic or expensive. Among these, sardines and pilchards stood out, cheap, preserved, and with a long shelf life. Putting them on toast, plain or buttered, gave a savoury breakfast option that required minimal prep, preserved food, and little fuel. The briny flavour and oil from the tin added richness, making up for lack of fats and luxury in other parts of the diet. This breakfast was especially useful during rationing, when imports were constrained but canned goods were somewhat more available. School dinners and family meals often featured pilchards, and in personal stories from the late 1940s to 50s, tinned sardine salad and pilchard spreads appear frequently. When bread and dairy were substantial, but meat scarce, tinned fish on toast was filling, affordable, and provided essential nutrients. It also helped households stretch limited rations of fresh meat and eggs. Though not a daily prime breakfast for many, it was far from rare, and remains part of the nostalgic post-war food memory. The sizzle of leftover cabbage and potatoes hitting a hot pan was the soundtrack of many working-class kitchens, turning yesterday's scraps into a breakfast worth waking up for. The name comes from the sound the veg and spuds make as they sizzle and settle, bubble and squeak. It was a thrifty way to make a hot, savoury breakfast that required no fresh ingredients beyond yesterday's scraps. Perfect when food was scarce or fresh produce was rationed. Many households made bubble and squeak regularly, especially in working-class homes and rural areas where garden veg or allotment produce supplemented what rationing allowed. It provided carbohydrates, fibre, and some vitamins from the vegetables, plus the caloric punch of potatoes and fat used for frying. Sometimes served with a fried egg or a piece of toast, it was filling, economical, and lifted spirits. Its texture and taste vary by household, depending on what leftovers were available, making it both practical and deeply traditional. When butter was scarce, households turned to another rich spread: dripping, bread and dripping, a slice of bread, often the wartime or post-war national loaf, or simple white or wholemeal bread, smeared with meat fat left over from roasting, became a no-nonsense, energy-packed breakfast. Sometimes salted or eaten with a cup of tea, it offered grease, flavour, and calories in one cheap, satisfying bite. Dripping was gathered after roasting joints, carefully preserved in crocks or jars, so it could be used over several days. In stories from children and adults during and after World War II, bread and dripping is recalled not as luxury, but a treat. The mucky dripping just above the sediment layer was especially prized. While toast with butter was ideal, dripping was more available, especially in working-class homes making do. It filled stomachs, lifted spirits, and made the most of every edible remnant. Soft-boiled eggs with toast soldiers weren't just food. They were a morning game for children, learning to dunk the yolk just right. Households prepared eggs in different ways depending on availability and taste. Soft-boiled eggs with toast soldiers were a common morning ritual, particularly for children, offering a playful and nutritious start to the day. Poached eggs added a touch of elegance, with the runny yolk spilling over a slice of buttered toast, while scrambled eggs provided a creamy, filling option that could feed a hungry family with minimal fuss. Even when butter and dairy were rationed, a small amount was enough to make eggs richer and more palatable. Beyond food, it was a comforting ritual, offering warmth, flavour, and a sense of normalcy in households recovering from the shortages of the post-war era. In post-war Britain, Kedgeree offered a hearty, protein-rich breakfast that felt a little luxurious without being expensive. Adapted from the Anglo-Indian Kippers, British Kedgeree combined leftover or smoked fish, often haddock, with boiled rice and eggs. This made it ideal for households seeking a filling meal that stretched modest ingredients. A small tin of smoked fish or the leftovers from a Sunday dinner could be transformed into a substantial breakfast, while eggs added protein and richness. Parsley, curry powder, or a squeeze of lemon provided flavour without adding costly fats. Kedgeree's appeal lay in its versatility and economy. It could feed a family using minimal fresh ingredients, make use of leftovers, and still feel like a treat compared to plain toast or porridge. Its presence on post-war breakfast tables showed how British cooks creatively blended tradition, colonial influences, and thrift to keep mornings hearty and satisfying. Along the windswept coasts of Scotland and the Isle of Man, the smoky aroma of kippers was a breakfast ritual no morning could ignore. The process of kippering, which involves gutting and smoking the fish over oak wood chips, imparts a distinctive, smoky flavour and preserves the fish for extended periods. This preservation method made kippers an economical choice during times of rationing. Traditionally, kippers were served grilled or fried, often accompanied by buttered toast and sometimes garnished with a poached egg. Their popularity waned in the mid-20th century with the advent of convenience foods, but recent years have seen a resurgence in interest as younger generations rediscover this nutritious and flavourful dish. Kippers are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, contributing to heart health, and remain a cherished part of British culinary heritage. In post-war Britain, porridge or oatmeal was a staple breakfast that was cheap, filling, and highly adaptable. With rationing still affecting bread, butter, and sugar, Oats provided a reliable source of calories, fibre and nutrition. Families could cook them with water or milk, and sometimes sweeten with a small amount of sugar or syrup if available. Porridge could also be stretched with grated vegetables or leftover fruit to add bulk and flavour. Oatmeal's appeal lay not just in its affordability, but also in its practicality. It could be made quickly over a stove or in a pot, and it kept families warm on cold mornings. Even children and workers relied on it as a sustaining start to the day, especially when other proteins like eggs or bacon were scarce. Its role in post-war kitchens illustrates how simple, humble ingredients helped people stay nourished during times of economic strain. After years of wartime austerity, post-war mornings in Britain often began with a humble ritual: tea and toast. While rationing still limited butter, jam, and other spreads, a hot cup of tea paired with a crisp slice of toasted bread offered comfort, warmth, and a sense of normalcy. It was simple, fast, and affordable, a perfect start for families juggling scarce resources and busy mornings. The charm of tea and toast lay in its adaptability. A smear of butter or dripping, a thin layer of jam, or even just a sprinkling of sugar transformed the plain toast into a small indulgence. The tea itself provided not only energy, but also a moment of calm, a pause in the bustling start of the day. For many post-war households, this modest combination became a reliable breakfast staple, delivering both sustenance and a comforting connection to routine in a recovering nation. And that's it for today's trip down memory lane. Share your favourites in the comments and subscribe for more tasty journeys into the foods that shaped British kitchens, because some flavours are worth remembering. See you next time.